You're listening to Ink Tank by Movable Ink, designed to help digital marketing leaders excel in today's ever-changing environment. I'm Julio Lopez, Director of Client Strategy for Retail at Movable Ink.
And I'm Becky Francis, Associate Director of Client Strategy for EMEA Retail.
On today's episode, we'll take a look at the unique challenges and opportunities facing retailers in a post-pandemic world. What will the future of retail experiences look like, and how can brands make impactful changes to their digital offering as more and more consumers shift to online spending? To help us address these questions, we're delighted to be joined by FineMind's Head of Customer Experience, John Swords. Welcome to the Ink Tank, John.
Thanks for having me. Excited to share some insights and point of view on where retail is headed.
Well, it's great to have you here. So most of our listeners are very aware of who Movable Ink is, but John, perhaps you can kick us off by telling us a little bit about FineMind and your role at the company.
Sure. So FineMind provides outfit and pairing recommendations to customers. So we got our start with fashion brands. We help customers to see how outfits can be put together based on the merchandise that they're browsing on our customer sites. So we're all about pairing products together. Customers give us a few sample outfits that we use as training data, and then our machine learning models take it from there. In a way, we replicate what a store associate would do with a customer in the store, based on their own product knowledge. Only, we are leveraging this for, scale, where we're able to take a few inputs from a merchandiser and then scale that to an entire catalog so that there's recommendations really for everything that the store sells. We work now with fashion, home goods, and beauty. And my personal role is overseeing product and account management.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're joining us. I'm sure you'll be providing some great insight into the future of retail. So let's kick things off. Becky, you were recently heading up CRM at Revolution Beauty in the UK. And given your role, I think you have a unique inside baseball point of view on what's happening now. So what does the retail landscape look like right now?
Yeah, so the retail sector is going through a significant transition right now. In March, we obviously saw all non-essential stores close down, and as well as store closures, some e-commerce retailers also temporarily suspended trading as warehouse procedures needed to accommodate social distancing rules. So those factors led to some really tough March trading results for the industry as a whole. In the US, retail sales fell by 8.7% in the month of March, and in the UK, that drop was just over 5%. But it now feels like we're moving into a second phase. So e-commerce retailers have been able to gain control of any supply chain issues quickly, and most sites are not only back trading again, but are actually seeing positive traffic and sales growth as a result of lots of consumers being stuck at home on their devices. We've also heard quite a lot over the past few days about stores starting to reopen too, or at least starting to plan phases of reopening. But as we look towards that and getting back to some degree of normality, if we can even use that term to describe the post-COVID world, it's important to remember that these aren't going to be short-term issues. The crisis will have a long-lasting impact in a variety of different ways. Last week, Forrester predicted that the pandemic will wipe $2.1 trillion off of global sales in 2020 and warned that it could take up to 4 years for retail sales to bounce back to pre-pandemic levels. So this really is just the beginning of a really extremely turbulent time for retailers.
Yeah, so we're in the midst of earnings season, and it's been a very strange quarter to analyze because, at least for the U.S.-focused brands and retailers, while they may have been facing some supply chain issues at the beginning of the year because of China, the shutdown really didn't hit physical retail here until March, so that only left like a month in the quarter. So it's a very mixed quarter. So far, there's roughly about 80% of the companies have withdrawn their guidance for the remainder of the year. There's a lot of uncertainty for sure. The big retailers most at risk, are obviously those that went into the pandemic with some combination of weakness on their balance sheet, heavy dependence on physical stores, or their business rely, very heavily on events, sporting events, and other restricted activities that are just now starting to open up in some areas. And of course, not covered in the quarterly earnings is all the small business brick and mortar retailers who probably were the hardest hit. Many of them did not have more than a few months of cash going into the shutdown. Restaurants probably less than a month. So there's just a lot yet to be played out there.
Yeah, there's definitely no denying the grim picture that retail currently paints. And as you mentioned, John, there's still so much more that hasn't been captured with regard to the full impact. But to your point, Becky, although the full impact of this pandemic will be seen in the long term, we are starting to see some signs of return. So perhaps not to normal as we knew it, but to a post-COVID world normal. So in the US, Macy's has reopened a number of stores. I believe the number was 68. And they plan to continue their openings, assuming that infection rates decline and that local governments allow retailers to open. And in the UK, we've seen home improvement stores reopen with social distancing measures in place and apparel brands like Next announcing that they plan to reopen stores imminently. So I guess that begs the question, what will these store reopenings look like for retailers?
So as they do start to reopen, stores are going to need to really focus on soothing customer fears. People are cautious, understandably. So there'll be a continued focus on social distancing, and shoppers can expect things like queues outside the store, entry management systems, and distance markers to become commonplace. I think cleaning and sanitation will also inevitably play a big role in restoring people's confidence. We'll see an increase in things like shopping cart sanitation and contactless payments and perspex screens at checkouts too. But I think what's really interesting in all of this is that in this need to minimize human-to-human contact, we already are seeing a big rise in innovation in the retail sector. We've already seen some stores move to an appointment-based model, for example. So if we take Best Buy, they plan to reopen 200 of their stores later this month using a system where customers can schedule appointments with sales associates, and we've seen similar approaches to that here in the UK too.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to see physical retail returning to what it was before. I guess I'm going to be the pessimist. They're going to play us, Becky, back and forth off of each other. I think there's been an accelerated shift, to online shopping. Reports are, I guess Forrester had said 25% of retail spending was online for the month of April, which accelerated, a couple of years of that acceleration into just a matter of a couple months. There's a lot of newly introduced friction to physical store shopping that you touched on. From a consumer perspective, and maybe I'm biased because I'm here in the city. I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to be fun to go shopping in like New York City in 2020. Personally, right now it feels a bit like a moonwalk to go to the grocery store. Before I leave, I have to think, do I have my face mask? Do I have my bag? Do I have something to do while I wait in line? Am I standing in the right place? Once I get there, am I walking down the aisle in the right direction? So I think there's a lot there within the consumer perspective. From retailers' perspective, I think they have to figure out how to operate with a cap of 25 or 50% of their customers in their stores and reduce staffing. And so bottom line, the challenge facing all merchants is, I think, trying to find a unique formula that makes the shopping experience feel safe and fun, while also getting back to profitability and being successful. For the first few months of the shutdown, it felt like a lot of retailers were busy triaging their businesses. They were dealing with supply chain issues. They were renegotiating contracts, trying to implement curbside pickup, as you said. And since then, we've seen industry groups like NRF release guidelines. There's also a plan that the state of Tennessee released that is a 24-page plan on how they want to see retailers and everything reopen. So and I think now that sort of the initial shock has hit, everyone is sort of coming together, and I really feel like retailers and brands are entering into something that looks like a wartime innovation posture.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, John. digital innovation is going to be key to success. And to your point, Becky, regarding curbside pickup and appointment booking, it feels like the new retail norm will, by necessity, be a much more blended multi-channel experience. So what are your thoughts on how retailers can adapt and offer the seamless channel agnostic experience?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that the customer journey for most shoppers wasn't necessarily linear or single channel even prior to this pandemic. So just one example of that is click and collect. In 2019, there were over 29 million click and collect shoppers in the UK. So for some time now, the customer experience has been blurred across channels, and we can only expect that to increase. So to answer your question about how retailers can adapt to that, firstly, I think it comes down to a simple recognition of that fact. Retailers need to approach any customer touchpoint with that reality in mind. So that could be via in-email tactics, for example, showing the customer's local store location and opening times. Stores are obviously opening at different rates with different services and in many cases different hours of operations as well. So being able to serve the most relevant, local and accurate data to customers will be vital to providing a good customer experience. Similarly, with stock availability, customers understandably don't want to risk going into store if the item they want isn't in stock. So being able to show real-time stock availability in the customer's chosen or their local store will make for a much easier shopping experience too. So just really doing everything they can to make sure that that experience is as seamless as possible for the customer. And secondly, I think we're in such a state of flux right now. Things are changing, not just by the week or the day, but by the hour sometimes. So being able to be really flexible and react quickly to those changing circumstances are going to be really important for retailers. In the long run, I think what we'll see is many more companies investing in technology that will allow them to react quickly. One of the many lessons that retailers have learned from this crisis is the need to be nimble.
I agree with all of that. Yeah, so I think in terms of maybe clienteling as an area, store associates have traditionally always been available to assist with recommendations, and I think there's a challenge to be solved as we reopen, where people standing 6 feet apart, wearing masks, trying to awkwardly discuss merchandise they can't really touch, I think is going to be you know, um, difficult. So an e-commerce habit that I think is going to increasingly shift to the physical stores is the use of smartphones to view recommendations, sourced from the merchandiser's perspective and the customer feedback and all of that. And I think in the longer term, we can move some of that to that digital content back to the store associates. But at least in the short term, I think um, people are going to be using their phones. They may have to heavily disinfect them after they leave the store, but I think they'll use their phones more in store for research. There's also an aspect of fitting rooms and try before you buy tech. Um, with retailers facing challenges with shoppers handling merchandise and trying it on, I could sort of see a unifying effect between physical and online, where the e-commerce has inherently had a contact-free product return process since it was created. So it's possible that we see sort of a more unified approach to how that is handled across retailers. And then, as Becky mentioned earlier, I think point of sale is another area. Um, the endless receipt necktie that you get, the stream of paper that you get handed at some brick and mortar stores when you check out, I think that may go away. Mastercard reported that they've seen a jump of more than 40% in contactless transactions and just overall a lot more card transactions during the pandemic. So, digital wallet tech taking over for physical cards and cash, I think that will ultimately translate to more consumers using things like, for example, Apple Pay, not just in store to avoid touching a keypad, but many more will discover that, once they have that set up, it just starts working in their web browser or on their phone when they're shopping from home, and can save them a lot of time from re-entering information. So in general, I think a lot of things may converge between online and in store.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you both for that insight. You're both 100% correct in that the ability to adapt the ability to be nimble, and the willingness to try new things and leverage new technology is going to be what separates leading retailers. We focus a bit on stores reopening and the impact on physical retail locations. But as we mentioned, one of the biggest retail shifts we've seen throughout this crisis is the shift to online shopping. Now, I've got a couple of stats here. So online sales as a proportion of all retailing reached a record high of 22.3% in March 2020 as consumers switched over to online purchasing. We've also seen that online sales volumes leapt 210% between February 24th and April 15th. So based on this data alone, it feels like this crisis and our need to stay at home has really accelerated retail's movement towards digital first. And digital innovation was already top of mind for many retailers and has been for some time. But the prolonged periods of lockdown has meant that more and more market share has moved online. I read that the CEO of Shopify said that their platform is now handling Black Friday levels of traffic every day.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing Black Friday, Cyber Monday traffic levels every day at FindMine, and the traffic continues to grow. We're also seeing that customers that have had us deployed in some of their major markets are expediting their expansion and use of our solution into other markets. There's also some really interesting new retail entries. Some of the most traditional business categories are now incorporating digital in some new ways. So you mentioned Shopify. Um, Shopify reported earnings this morning, and they played a customer support call from a farmer that was in tears, thanking them for their platform because it was allowing them to put in place curbside pickup. And they also reported, growth in categories in food and beverage and tobacco that were, I guess, unique in the last 8 weeks or so. Certainly another impact is inventory volatility and supply chain disruption. I think, some product categories are having sort of flash sale type volumes and things are moving very quickly. So systems that were traditionally in place that receive like nightly inventory updates and product information and more coarse inventory thresholds that were being used have to move to near real time or more frequent updating because things are there's price watches for toilet paper right now and the by the time you click on the link it's already gone. So supply chain and logistics delays are causing some more pronounced challenges in terms of merchandising products that suit particular styles or themes or looks. So the role of a merchandiser is definitely more difficult right now. And I'd also say since we're talking about Shopify, they also said about consumers they saw a major spike in first-time shoppers using their platform just in the last 8 weeks. So there's definitely new people that have never bought from a Shopify store or other online stores. I'm sure the trend's not limited to them in the last few weeks.
Yeah, one thing I find really interesting is the demographic makeup of these online shoppers that are driving this e-commerce growth. So one of the biggest growth audiences for online retail during this pandemic has been the so-called silver surfers. So consumers who are 55 and over, whose online shopping was previously minimal, and now they're suddenly somewhat dependent on e-commerce as they're forced to stay at home. So this opens up a previously untapped audience for many online retailers. But the question becomes, once we reopen stores, will these new audiences and customers stick with the brand? In many ways, acquiring customers right now is easier, and retaining them in the longer term is what's going to be more difficult. So what are some of the ways that digital marketers can ramp up the online customer experience to retain customers?
Yeah, that's a really great point. I think whether it's specifically for a silver surfer who is perhaps used to your point, John, store associates who've been able to assist with recommendations and service in store, or even just the broader customer base who might not be able to visit their local store as easily as they once had, experiences are going to be really key for both those groups. So retailers will be putting a renewed focus on matching and excelling the personal touches of an in-store environment into the online experience. And we'll see that play out in some sectors more than others. So for luxury in particular, even as recently as 2019, 72% of luxury consumers prefer to purchase in-store. And they're obviously spending a significant amount of money and they want to be able to touch and feel products before buying. So luxury and apparel retailers are going to need to think really innovatively about how they can attempt to bridge that gap. So I think we'll see AR coming into play a lot more. And again, as you mentioned, John, some of the try before you buy services like Klarna. I also think that customer reviews are going to be really crucial as retailers look to replace the feedback of sales personnel or fellow shoppers in that in-store environment. And we're already seeing data that shows that engagement with customer reviews has really increased over the past few weeks. So shoppers are heavily relying on review content to help them make purchase decisions.
Yeah, I think this is a very fluid situation right now, and probably for the foreseeable future. Um, Knowing the online customer and offering basic recommendations just based on some basic behavior and personal tastes, especially if you're looking at a lot of historical data, I really think that that's table stakes going forward. I think that consumer personas, spending patterns, logistics, available inventory, retail formats, even brand values, all of it is really nowhere near settling, and I think it needs constant reevaluation. So that sort of set it and forget it. The idea that there's one particular consumer that is female, she's 40, she drives a certain car, and she does all that. I think a lot of that needs to sort of be blown up right now, and I think. The most effective recommendations will be the ones that take all of this fluidity and all of this data that we're going to have into account in more real time, or at least more near term evaluation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, John. And it's not just post-pandemic. I think consumers want brands to deliver these hyper-personalized, relevant content. And one of the most intimate pieces of content are recommendations. So in a way, I think those recommendations are commentary on who the customer is, and it's important that brands get it right. So why don't we end this ink tank with some predictions? What do we think the rest of 2020 will look like?
Yeah, so I think there will inevitably be an adjustment period. I think we're all in agreement that we're far from over this pandemic. And I predict that retailers who invest in strong online direct consumer experiences will thrive. In terms of the sector as a whole, I think it's going to be a rocky few months, as we've discussed. Apparel tends to come back strong after the SARS pandemic, for example. Clothing and cosmetics follows a dip and rebound pattern, which means that shoppers deferred purchases during the crisis and then returned in droves when it was safe to do so. And we've already seen the advent of so-called revenge buying in Asia. So although we're a long way from that, I think shoppers will be looking to return to stores as a marker of normality.
So, predictions are only fun if they're controversial. So I'll take the less upbeat view and say I think we're um, in a cycle that lasts a little bit longer than a few months. I think the impact and the recovery is very unevenly distributed going forward. So I'll predict that in New York State, I think densely populated areas like New York City, maybe Long Island won't fully reopen this year. So at least where I'm at here in New York, I think 2020 ends pretty much the way it is right now. Meanwhile, I think the rest of the state could be fully opened, and a lot of other states will be open. I think that the growth in digital experience as part of the commerce equation, it will come with some great benefits. Starting with technology partners like us and retailers. I think that I will predict that we'll benefit because more traffic, more data, albeit it'll be more complex data, is going to be really beneficial. I think things, just as an example, A/B testing on new ideas, you should be able to reach significance, statistical significance, a lot faster, which means that you can run more experiments, and which means that innovation should happen more quickly. And I think that that's very exciting for all of us. I think in terms of consumers, I would suggest that another prediction here would be that as point of sale systems and smartphone use in store and for both research and for payment, as more of this stuff converges, I think you'll actually see more product reviews as a result, and more NPS scores will be collected, which will make a lot of people happy. And I think there's an opportunity to optimize that experience. So I think that there could be sort of an information overload where retailers used to struggle getting the first 15 or 20 reviews. Now they might have a lot more. So I think curation will be key to that, and I think brands can play a big part in that capacity. And then I think struggling brands that don't make it through to the other side of this, may have their brand name reemerge under new ownership, selling different product assortments, using different manufacturing sources. So I would make a prediction that for those, and hopefully it's not many, there's a risk consumers may develop a bit of a pre-2020 versus post-2020 vintage perspective, where there's a split between brands around that. It's sort of like, is your home a World War II or post-war kind of thing? Like it could be something like that. And of course, the brands with strong brand names that go into bankruptcy that reemerge intact will be just a lot stronger.
Well, I appreciate the different point of views, but I think it's safe to say that brands that have worked hard to foster brand loyalty through relevancy and hyper personalization will be the ones that come back strong. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thank you, Becky, for joining us all the way from London, and a huge thank you to our guest, John Swords, Head of Customer Experience at FindMine, for sharing your wonderful insights. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to subscribe to Ink Tank so you don't miss any upcoming episodes.